All right, so where we left off yesterday was we implemented splitting out the multiple, splitting out the deposit, spend, and import onto separate pages, and then that was in preparation for adding security. So one thing I was trying to figure out was the logout stuff. Um, but as you can see here, so one thing that yesterday was causing a problem was I was using the wrong time leaf extensions. So you'll notice here, and obviously this is just temporary, it displays who the logged in user is and what roles they have. And so we can see where that is here. We're using this sec authentication and principal authorities and name. This comes from the time leaf Spring Security extras. The problem yesterday was I was pulling in the Spring Security 4. Hey, Alex. Um, I was pulling in the Spring Security 4 instead of the Spring Security 5 because I keep going back and forth because the training that I do at companies, they're years behind, and so they're mostly sitting on, if they're doing Spring Boot at all, they're mostly sitting on Spring Boot 1.5, which is Spring Framework 4, which means you have to use the time leaf security stuff that's for 4. This project, though, is using the latest Spring Boot 2.13 release that actually recently just came out. And I have to use Spring Security 5, otherwise the stuff doesn't hook up right. So once I switched it to Spring Security 5, everything worked in terms of showing this stuff up. So now what we can do is we can hide these buttons. The idea is to hide these buttons from those who don't have permission to access it. So one thing I want to do is I want to get the logout button working. I changed the colors a little bit. I'm still not 100% happy with this. I was researching, once again, some lightweight CSS frameworks. I'm probably going to try, there's one called Bulma. So I'll probably switch over to this at some point because I need a little bit more styling. Plus, again, this page is not very responsive. Um, so that's actually one of the features I have. And if we look in our Trello board, we see that make view balance prettier is one of the things that I want to get to. So I want to get the logout working because without logout, it makes it really annoying to test. So we have a login page. It's super simple, not at all styled. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But let's look at our security config file. So let's make it wider. So basically, to review this, we want to authorize requests. So any page that matches just slash, if you have the role kid, you are authorized to view. These pages, you have to have the role of parent. I actually can make, right now I sort of spell these out explicitly, but because these are ant matchers, so I remember when I was first looking at this, it's like, did they misspell any? Like, what the heck did they mean by ant? Uh, so for those of you who haven't been around a while, ant is one of the early build tools for that was eventually replaced for the most part by Maven and Gradle. But the idea of the ant matcher is really it's a pattern matching thing, so that you can say what what URLs do you want to be able to define that you're going to have, sort of apply some role to. So the ant matcher is a specific syntax for indicating things like I want all URLs. I want all URLs, including any hierarchy. So if you have A/B/C, then /** would apply to everything in that hierarchy. Uh, Let me look up the syntax for Spring Security and Matcher syntax. So that's ant path matcher. You can start there though, because it's basically, so these are the ant style path patterns. The syntax is somewhat regex-like, sort of, kinda, but not really. So the idea is that you have your typical sort of wildcard. Your question mark matches one character. Your star matches 0 or more characters. The important part is the double star is it matches the directories, right? So if you look at these examples, if you had com_star.jsp, then it would match all JSPs, but just in that directory. Whereas com/star would mean match this file in any directory underneath com. And so that applies here. So if I said **, that would apply to anything both at the root and deeper. I'm going to leave it explicit for now because otherwise there might be some weirdness with the login pages, so I'm going to leave it explicit for now. So we've got the authorize for those pages. We have the form login to get login. The log out, it's supposed to, let's see, so log out. So this is if I want to customize it, but if you don't customize it, let me make this bigger. So it's automatically applied. The default is that accessing the URL /logout will log the user out. So the question is, why, when I hit logout, I guess what the question is, what's the default for that? So let's take a look at the docs. Logout default. So as much as I think this site, Baildung, has some good stuff, I have a couple of issues with it. One is that this date, and it's kind of annoying that it does this, is that date gets updated fairly frequently, so it looks like, oh, this is new. It's not, and some of the stuff is actually old, and it's kind of hard to tell. In my opinion, if you're going to have a technical blog or any kind of technical article, and the date does not actually match the date that it was written or updated, that's just kind of wrong. Because especially for something like Spring, where if you look at something even just 3 or 4 years ago, the current way to do things has completely changed. And so I'd want to see, like, when was this written, so I can know, is this kind of matching what I'm working with? Even better, in addition to the date, would be, this applies to Spring version blah 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 through blah blah blah. My goal is to always look at the reference manuals written by the Spring folks, and as I've mentioned, I'm sure a bunch of times on this stream, it has some of its own issues, but it is the definitive answer to any question that you might have. Sometimes it's hard to read, sometimes it doesn't have enough good examples, but it's where you should first go. So let's see. So login, logout handler. So handling logouts. When using this, logout capabilities are automatically applied. The default is that will log the user out. So, okay, so that means I shouldn't even have to need this. So let's comment this out. I'll put a semicolon there. And we'll restart. And we'll go back here, refresh the page. Wow, that took a long time to start up. So let's log out. So I basically made this button, this is actually a link, go to /logout. So there's no page for it, but the question is am I actually logged out? So if we go back to the home page, so it's not actually logging me out, which is frustrating. So it says it's I mean, we are using the web, right? I am using the right class. Yes, web security configure adapter. So I guess the question is if I am if I'm overriding this. So I wonder if the minute you override it, all the defaults are gone. So that's my guess. So let's actually look at, yeah, okay. So this is the default implementation, and so you can see it does HTTP basic as man, sometimes IntelliJ's help goes all over the place. Okay, so yeah, so basically the default probably handles the logout, and so so we need to actually specify that ourselves. All right, so then we do need this part, and take out the semicolon there. The question then is do I now, the minute I specify logout, I guess I have to specify the logout URL. All right, so let's do that. I don't want, I guess we could look at what this does. So it creates a new logout configurer, which logout success URL logout. So what is the default logout URL? So it is logout, but oops, let's go back to my security config. So let's do /logout, and what else can we do? Logout. So our logout success URL will be login, logout. It seems like that's the default, but it's unclear from the docs what's actually necessary. And so this is a problem I have with sort of the Spring docs in general, is that it immediately says you have various options, and then basically gives you one example that has 6 different options applied. And so now I'm sitting here looking at this and like, what's necessary, what is default, what's overriding default. And it says this is automatically applied, but clearly that's not what I'm seeing. So, okay, so we've listed the docs. Now we want to look elsewhere. We can take a look at Bildung and see what they say. Basic configuration. So basically just do a logout. Problem is this uses JSP. So the minute I see JSP, I'm thinking this is not fair. This is not very recent because right, if you're starting a new project, why are you doing JSP? And so a hint that I have is this has comments, and so I can see the first comment was from 3 years ago. So that means I know this posting is at least 3 years old, even though it's dated November 2018. And again, this is what's annoying about this site. So by default, this is the root page. That doesn't seem to be what the documentation says. And it says the default is logout, but that doesn't seem right either. So this is not helpful. The other thing I do when I'm searching for Spring in general is I use my the Google tools. So I use the Google tools and I basically restrict it to like, show me just what's in the past year. So that way at least there's a chance, a likely chance that or it's less likely that I'll see something that's old. Let's see. Java configuration. Is this different? So this is slightly different. Let's see. This is the web MVC. Here's the HTTP security. That's the login page. Let's authorize requests. No, this is where I was. So again, here you can see the ant matcher syntax, right? Star star. We actually probably should put a permit all on our resources. That's probably a good idea. I'm guessing that happens by default, but because we haven't locked down anything else. So authorize requests. Well, we'll look at that later. Right now, let's focus on the logout. Okay, so we've configured logout to go to this specific page and then go, after you're done, goes back to login. All right, that's up and running. Let's go back here, refresh the page. So we want to log out. That's not where it should have gone. Oh. That is where it should have gone. We told it to go to logout. We don't have a logout page. Do we need to have a logout page? Can we just log out and go back to root? I guess what do we want to happen? If they log out, we want to go back to the login page. But I actually don't want them to go anywhere. I just want them to go directly to here. So after URL to redirect to after logout has occurred. So maybe this one it'll just use as a redirect. The URL that triggers logout to occur. If CS, then this must be best practice, but in change of state. That means by default, post logout is required to trigger a logout. Yeah, so we're not using Csrf. I guess we should. But so basically, the idea is to protect against certain types of attacks, cross-site forgery. So is it trying to do a post? Let's see. Yeah, cross-site request forgery is what we'd need. So I guess we want to have, so this is the login page, authorize requests, handling logouts. Well, let's see. Okay, so I want to log out. Oh, the button is going to slash logout, and that's why it's a problem. What if we do that? And what if we pretend, though, that we're logged in? So that's not logging us out. So it seems like we have to provide our own logout. So let's see. So it looks like this is similar to what we're doing. This is really hard to read, so let's look at another example. So this is a custom login form. Oh, this is a pretty recent guide. So it looks like they've created some new guides for this stuff. I can tell because the layout is different. Let's see. So configuring a custom login page, create a login page. So let's look at this. So basically, we've got this form login that's using basic authentication. We don't want basic, but we'll get there. So he specifies a login page. So this tells Spring Security when we need to be logged in, when we're viewing something that requires permissions, it redirects you to login. That's what we're already doing. We're in charge of rendering the page. If it fails, it goes to login error. When we successfully log out, it will redirect to here. We're in charge of rendering. That's interesting. So what does he do for the login page? So here's his login view. This does a post to login, which we're already doing. This is a please log in page. So this is much more complicated, but basically the same idea. He's showing errors. So that's just a login page. So interesting. So this is where he's displaying you've been logged out. I don't think we're doing that, so we should probably do that. So let's go to our login page, which is pretty simple. Yeah, we're not displaying any errors at all. So how does he do that? He basically, in the controller, oh, he hasn't written the controller yet. That's interesting that does permit all. I don't think I need to do that. So that's the security config. This is the login HTML. This configures the controller. Oh, he already has a controller from another project. This is again sort of the problem with some of these documentation is that there's a dependency. Like this guide isn't a standalone guide. That's kind of a bummer. All right, well then let's look at the other guide. Maybe it has what we want. What we want is the controller. So that's What's next? So creating a custom login form. All right, so is there some other guide? So let's see. So this is logout. That's a secured page. Where's the project? Spring security. Let's see. So this guide isn't helping me. I mean, we can tack on to our let's see. So I don't think that matters that much. So let's look at some other ideas. This site is so annoying with its pop-ups and so on. This I don't like the looks of. So we got our Spring security config. There's the in-memory authentication. There's the form login. There's the logout. So Spring security, we don't need to do that. It does that for us. Custom login form. Do I have a controller? All right, let's see here. So in our web adapter, we have our login controller. Right, so what happens is if we go to login, it just returns the login page. If we go to login error, then it returns, basically puts in login error true. But what I want is to handle logout. So I guess I need to write a controller for that. Like, none of the guides told me I need to do that, but sure. What if I just do this? I don't think that's necessarily good enough. So let's do a, I know we're not supposed to do a get mapping, but we don't have Csrf on, so we'll just do for logout, we'll just do this. We'll just redirect to this. Oops, blew past my Pomodoro. I'll take a break in a couple minutes. So we're not really doing much with our login page here. We are displaying if there is an error, then we're displaying that there's an error. We're not displaying that if you're logged out or anything like that. Um, So how does he handle logout? Well, this is a JSP page, which is unfortunate because I don't use JSP. Let's take a look here. This is pretty old also. Yeah, because this is XML configuration. So, all right, let's fall back to Stack Overflow. But this is also using XML. That's not what we want. Everybody's telling us about login, and I want to know about logout. It's kind of funny. Let's go back to here. So this goes to log out. That's after logout. That's fine. That's the success handler. All right, let's look at source code. So Spring Security logout. Oops. So let's take a look at the logout. The other thing I'm going to be needing to do is updating all our, now that we have Spring Security applied, is updating the integration tests to basically have a logged in user so we can access it. So controller, so that's just secured. Security. So this is a custom handler. I don't want a custom handler. That's using, yeah, this stuff is old and is using JSP, which is kind of unfortunate. So this may not be useful for us. Let's take a look at the security config just to see if there's anything here. So basically, I could just, I don't know if I have to explicitly disable Csrf. I forget what the default is. So login. All right, this is not helping me here. Let's see. Let's try that link. So logout URL. Oh, okay. So then that is what's happening. That's annoying. Okay, so it's trying to do a get, but it's not going to respond to a get because we have Csrf enabled, and Csrf for things like a logout require a post instead of a get. So I think if we just turn off Csrf temporary for now, oops, .csrf .disable. And then let's see if we just do that, what happens. So let's restart it. I am definitely going to have to write a tutorial of my own for this because this shouldn't be that hard. All right, so let's go ahead and reload. Log out. Okay, so that worked. And if we try to get to here, it's going to force us to log in. So now we can log in as the parent. And now we are the parent and we have both the kid and the parent roles. We can log out. Okay. All right. So that's annoying. That was the CSRF stuff. So if we turn it back on, then we, I guess, have to write a controller that handles a post. Okay. Well, all right. So now, since my Pomodoro is way past, let me take a couple of minute break. And when we come back, what we'll do is now that we've got login and logout working, we will hide the buttons that are not available depending on the role. All right. So see you in a few minutes. So what we want is, and actually there's a layout change I want to make now that we have these buttons. So let's log in as parent. Let's go to import CSV. Let's go to copy these, import. Okay, so what we see is now that when there's a bunch of transactions, the buttons are all the way at the bottom, and I'd like to move the buttons up a bit. It's not going to look great because these buttons are kind of big, but I want to put them basically at the top, basically between the balance and the table itself. So let's go ahead and do that. And that's in our account balance. So let's take this and move it above the table. And let's see how that looks. For some reason, the CSS is taking a long time to load. I wonder if it's because it has to go through authentication. All right, well, we'll worry about that later. Okay, so now the buttons are here. This logout is kind of weird because I did a float right, and there's something I always forget about how to get that correct. I'll fix that later. Okay, so okay, so now that we got the buttons in the right place, what we want to do is we want to hide them, basically hide these three if you're not permitted. So we'll need to look at, hold on to that page. What we need to look at is in time leaf, Spring security extras. And what we want is That's configuration. Okay. So authentication name. So we were showing name here, and that's basically authentication name. So what we want to do is we basically want to do a thif. That's one way, but actually using the authorize, so just like we used authentication as a shorthand, we can use authorize. So basically we want something like this div. So let's wrap this thing into a div. We'll take out this comment. And so let's just indent these. Oh, actually the logout, hold on. The logout we don't want. We always want to have the logout. And let's close the div. So close the div here. And this, so now, and then let's indent this. And so now we want to say the role that we want to have, this is role parent. Right, because the way the Spring security stuff works is it always prefixes the role name that we gave it in our code, right, in our security config, right? We had role parent and roles parent. So prefixes role underscore with that. And so that means these will only show up if you're logged in as a parent. Otherwise, it will. Otherwise, it should be not visible. So let's do that. Let's go here. Let's log out. And so let's log in as parent. Make sure we still see it. And we do. And as I expected, that div made things go a little wonky. Let's log out, and let's log in as the kid. We shouldn't see those, and we don't, and we do see our logout, and so that's all working. Cool. All right. What else? So we've got our logout. We don't need this stuff here anymore. That was just for debugging. And we'll need to clean up our login page, but I'm not gonna worry about that right now because you've all suffered enough with me struggling with my HTML CSS skills. Let me make login, logout page prettier. The one thing I do want to do is turn on Csrf for security. And so we'll want to do that pretty early on. We already did this update. I just never dragged it to done. And we have split these pages, so I'll drag that to done. So what's left is basically, is the tests. So my guess is that these integration tests will not work because security is on. Let's see about that. So we'll run our integration tests. Right, so these are failing because of security stuff is my guess. No, actually, let's see. So null pointer exception. This one is failing because we get a redirected URL to login. That's understandable. This one, oh, because we got redirected. We followed the redirect and we ended up on login, so there were no transactions in that page. Okay, so that makes sense. Right, so what happened was any of these, right, even this. So basically, new account view has no transactions. So we tried to get a slash, but we couldn't. We got redirected to the login. And so this was basically null, and that's why we got a null pointer exception. We could stick in an assert that our MVC result what do I want? The response so basically, oops. So I think that's what I want. Right, I want to make sure that when we do a get slash that we're not getting redirected, or if we are getting redirected, it goes to slash. I'm not quite sure what we're going to get here, so let's actually go ahead and debug this one. It's funny, because of the way I do mostly test first or test driven development, it's rare that I'm using the debugger on my code. I'm usually using it to figure out how other code works, right? So here I'm like, what am I getting back from doing a perform if it does try to redirect me? And so that's me trying to figure out other people's code, not my own code, because I've got good tests for my own code. All right, so our MVC result, let's do this. So we'll do MVC result, get the response, and get redirected URL. Right, so that's redirecting us. So the question is if we turn security off, what would it be? So let's try that out. Let's go into our security config, and we will just comment this out, and we'll re-debug. And so security is basically turned off, so it should act the way it was acting before, unless security is automatically applied because I have security. I should have just done a permit all. All right, it still might break, but let's see what happens. So yeah, what was my MVC result? So MVC result, get response. What was the response? The response was basically, okay, so it basically applied, gave us a 401. So we basically want to make sure it's a 200. So get response is get response status is equal to, and so what do we expect here? Get status returns what? Returns an int. So actually, can I just directly do this against MVC result status? Oh, I'd have to use a result matcher. So let's see, get response. Yeah, so we'll just do get status. So assert that get status is equal to 200. And we'll set our breakpoint here. All right, so yeah, so just commenting this out doesn't turn off security. If we wanted to truly turn off security, then what we'd have to do is go into our POM file, oops, and actually turn off security here. So let's do that. And we'll let IntelliJ re-import our Maven file. And we'll now debug our test. So my expectation now is that when it tries to do, oh, yeah, that's kind of annoying. Because we pulled this out, now this file is no longer valid. So let's just do that and then comment out everything here. This is a really bad way of doing this, but it is what it is. All right, so let's try that again. So security is completely off, and what we want to check for is that in our test, that the response we get, if everything is cool, is basically a 200. Because otherwise it's either a 401, or if it's a redirect with security on, it might be a 301 or something like that. All right, so, yep, that's 200. Okay, so let's do that. Turn that off. We can stop this. I'm just looking at this class here, wondering if I want to refactor this or pull this back in. Because what I can do is I can pull this code into here, then this doesn't need the MVC result to be passed in. But this does throw exception. And then we don't pass this in. And then we don't need to pass this in. And that way, at least we've consolidated this assertion that we get a 200 before we try to extract the view. Okay. So now if we just run this pair of tests, security is still basically completely off, so these should pass. We'll turn security on, and then we'll look at how to have these tests basically are able to be logged in as the parent. And cool, okay, so they pass. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to re-enable security. So let's go back to our POM file, turn these back on. Then we can go to our security config, basically undo this stuff. And so now what we want to do is in our test, now we got to look at how do we do security testing. Do we have security tests imported? So this is DevTools, test scope. So we have Spring security tests. Okay, so we're good there. And what we want to do is we want to go so we want basically so we want to look at how do we test this stuff. Servlet, security namespace, Testing, test. So we want to do probably with mock user. So let's go to this part. So we've already got that. How could we most easily run as a specific user? But we want to specify with not just a mock user, we actually want to specify information about that user. So how do we do that? Looks like we pass those in as these parameters. Cool. So, right, we basically are going to want that. That's interesting that it's with mock user is applying to the method as opposed to the class. But I'm presuming that we could just apply it to the class. So we look at this and we said the target is either method or type. Okay, so that's fine. Remember, a class is a type, so we can do that. So we want this to be parent and the roles to be kid and parent, right? So those are the roles that we want to test. So now if we run this, this should still pass. So security's on, but we're basically logged in as a mock user, and hopefully that just works. While that's running, I want to just read a bit more. So this is with an anonymous user, with user details. With security context. Yeah, we haven't gotten to the more sophisticated security stuff, but that's cool. And look, our test passed, great. But now if we run this one will probably fail. So we can just run this one to make sure it fails, then we'll fix it. And again, this is sort of a good habit to get into of making sure the tests fail and fail in an expected way before you fix them. Even if you know exactly what the fix is, I want to make sure that these are failing in the correct manner. And it did fail. You can scroll down to see here and see that, because we expected 200, but we basically got a redirect. 302 is the redirect that would take us to the login screen. So now we can go back here, take our mock user, put it in here. There's probably going to be some way where we're going to want to apply this to multiple tests, because we're starting to accumulate a bunch of annotations, and we might want to have like an interface or sort of a meta annotation that does all these. So that might be something I want to look at. So let me create a story for that. Nope, that's not Trello. That's Trello. Create meta annotation for test classes to sort of encapsulate all of the needed test annotations for integration test. So this only applies to the integration test. The other ones don't really use any annotations that are relevant. Okay, so we added that to there, add that to here, and add that to our spend view integration test. We also probably want, let's run all of our tests, and while that's running, we'll think about, we want to write a test that indicates whether we are allowed to go to the spend or deposit or import if we're logged in as the kid. So it's going to be another integration test. Right, so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check if we just try to do a get against those, they should fail in an expected manner. So those should be pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and create a new, kid not allowed to spend deposit. Actually, I'm just going to say kid not allowed test. Uh-oh, our Twilio test failed. Let's look at that. Why did this fail? Oh, because this is another integration test that I forgot to add in. See, this is why I need that meta annotation. Okay, is that the only one that failed? That's the only one that failed. All right, so I'll run that while we're writing our kid not allowed. We are going to need these annotations, so we're going to need this one, this one, this one, this one. This one will be different, so it's going to be kid, and it's only going to have the role of kid. And so what we're going to want is a test, and good, the Twilio test passed. Kid should not be allowed to deposit. So what we want is we want to auto wire a mock MVC. And so mock MVC perform, and so this is going to go against, what did I say, deposit. Whoops. So get against the deposit. Why did it not automatically import that? Oh well. So against the deposit, we expect that the status that's a result matcher, yes. So we expect that the status is, now is it going to be a 3? If I try to access that, it's going to, but we are logged in. Is it going to it won't redirect us to the login. It should just give us a basically security unauthorized, which is is unauthorized. I think that's what it'll do. Well, let's do is okay. We expect this to fail, and then we can see exactly what we needed to do. And again, like I was just saying, here's a case where it's already implemented, and I probably should have written this test earlier, but you know, not perfect. But I still want this to fail, and fail for the correct reason, before I basically, I don't want to write it and it passes and I happen to guess right. So let's go ahead and run this test. While it's doing that, I just want to reformat all that code. So I expect this to fail, and I expect it to fail either with a 401 or a 403. I always forget which is which. So it failed with a 403 forbidden. Okay, good. So I think it's, so it should be is forbidden. Right, so forbidden means you are logged in, but you can't access it, versus you're not, I don't even know who you are. Right, so again, that's the difference between authentication and authorization. We are authenticated as a kid, like we did up here, but we are not authorized to visit this page. And kid should not be allowed to spend. And we can try out unauthorized just to be a fun way to fail. And then kid should not be allowed to import CSV. All right, so let's run these tests. This first one should now pass. These two should fail. We'll fix them up. They'll pass. And we could just do that the kid is allowed to hit the home page but does not see the buttons. But that's kind of almost a UI test, so I'm not going to worry about that. Even if those links happen to be appearing, if he clicks through because of this stuff, he won't be allowed to access it. Okay, good. So this one failed because we expected a 200. It was a 403. That's this one. And this one failed because we were saying we expect a 401, which is unauthorized, but no, it's actually forbidden. And we'll rerun these. So I think we're good for test coverage. So let's see. So I think we're good for test coverage there. And looking to see if there's anything we want to refactor. So, okay, so those all passed, so we're good. Let's run, well, let's just run all the tests, because basically I think we're about to check in. Right, so this failure URL we had, the logout is handled automatically. We've already put a story that we want to enable Csrf. We're not going to change anything with this. Obviously, this in-memory authentication is going to go away once we tie it to sort of a real authentication system. What else? We'll have some cleanup work to do on our CSS with our login page, but we already have a story for that. Our account balance page is fine. We've moved up stuff. We've applied this has role. We could put somewhere the username. So maybe that's useful. Let's see. That's interesting. So in addition to has role, we could actually use the authorized URL. That might actually make more sense because by specifying, so one of the things that you don't want to do in security is like have multiple places where sort of a role is being checked against something. You want to, that certainly is a place where you want to not repeat yourself. And so what we've done here is we basically said, show these links if you have the role of parent. But we've really already specified that in our security config, right? We've basically said you have access to these URLs if you're a parent. And so if we decided, okay, you know what, we want to allow the kid to be able to do spends, because if we're trying to protect the kid against cheating, well, if he wants to spend money, that's fine. Like, I'm concerned not about him spending money. I'm concerned about him depositing money that he didn't deserve to deposit. Right? So if we wanted to allow him to spend, now we'd have to change this in two places. So I actually don't want to do that. I want to go here, and we actually want to use this authorized URL. So let's do that. So let's take out this div and just wrap each. What if, do I need to? it may not need to be on, actually, so in that case, so if I'm going to take away the div, then, oops, then I can actually put that authorized URL directly, I think, in the A tag itself? Or does it need to be around it? I don't know why it thinks that, why does it think these are not allowed here? Oops. Okay, whatever. So I wonder if this works. Well, let's try it. I could write a test. What would that test be? That would basically be a get. I'd get the response, I'd get the body, and then I'd pretty much just look for, do I see an href with a slash deposit? It's adding one more slow test. You know what? Let's do it. Let's write one. So we'll create this is a transaction view test. I'll stick it in here for now, and then I'll move it out. So what we'll do is we'll do a test, and it's kid should not see link to deposit, right? Because that's the one we just added a tag onto. So we'll do a mock MVC.perform. We'll do a get against deposit. Sorry, we want to do a get against the root because we want to get the home page. And we then expect, whoops, the body no, what is it? Content? Yes. So we expect the content contains string contain, what is it? This is a ham crust matcher. I forget, what does this one do? If this just takes a string, that's the whole response. But if we do the one that takes a ham crust matcher, contains string, yeah, that's what we want. Okay. Contains string, and we want it to see if it contains the string, what is it? Deposit money. Right, because that's the only place it appears, deposit money. It only appears once. Okay, good. Deposit money. It's a ham crust matcher. Okay. I think that's all we need to do. We are logged in as the parent. Oh, so this one we would need to be logged in as the kid. So let's actually put that in the kid not allowed thing. That's where I should have put it in the first place. And let's just run this one. So basically we're going to do a get against the root page. We are logged in as a kid, and so it shouldn't be contain string. It should be not contain string, but let's see if this fails. So we expect this to fail because it shouldn't contain the string deposit money. If it does, then our sec tag doesn't operate on the A, and we have to wrap it either with a span or a div. I'll probably wrap it with a span, because divs are blocks and they move stuff around, and I don't actually want it to move around. Okay, so it did fail. and it failed because, and in fact, you can even see here the space where the deposit money tag would have gone. So, okay. So the ham crest matcher, again, this is, I really dislike ham crest matchers. Not contains, not. So import static method. I want ham crest matchers. Okay. So, yep, okay. That wasn't too bad. So let's run this. That works. While that's running, we can actually go here and now basically add on these. So this one is spend, and this one is import. That's much nicer because now we're sure that these will only be displayed if they're allowed, and if we decide that we want them to go to deposit, then that's fine. Cool. Anything else we want to do? We don't have access control lists. We could show the authentication name. Let's just put this in at the bottom. That way we can sort of see that information. Okay. I think we are done with this. So let's go ahead and commit. I'm 99% sure all the tests pass, but well, I've been wrong before. All right, so we are on episode 16. Completed implementing security for individual pages and updated tests to handle security by pretending to be logged in as appropriate. I think that's it. All right. And all the tests pass. Right? Yep, all the tests pass. All right, good. We'll commit. And we will push. And so that's it for security, and that's it for separating out the pages. So we can go to our Trello board and say, this is now done. Yay. So got about 20 minutes left. What else do I want to do? So actually, what we just pushed will be built and get deployed onto Heroku. Well, I think I turned it off, but I'll turn that back on. So what else do we want to do here? Not quite at database migration yet. We'll do timely fragment next time. So there's nothing interesting, nothing appealing here. So input validation. Yeah, so right now we don't have any input validation. Do we even have any, like, I forget, can I deposit negative money? So let me log out. Would help if I ran the application. So in our web controller for our deposit, so we process the deposit command. I don't believe the transaction command does any validation, right? Yeah, it does not do any validation. So we could start looking at the validation that we want, because right now, if I try, I'll log in as a parent. If I want to spend money, I can spend negative $35, right? Yeah, that's not good. So we always want our transaction amounts to be greater than 0. Otherwise, like, do we want to allow you to deposit 0? Right now, I can't think of any reason. So let's put some validation in there. What we want is we basically want amount to be validated. And so what we can use is we can use the Java validation framework. I forget which JSR it is, but if we go to here and we go, let's see, do I have validation here? That might be my other. Oh, you know what? I want to see if our security config we can permit all, sorry, authorize, authorize requests, ant matchers. So we'd like, that's a good question actually. Where is KidBank? Is it coming from just KidBank CSS? Yeah, okay. So KidBank CSS, and we'll have to rename this because I sort of rebranded this, permit all. Okay. I wonder if that'll speed things up. So I'll restart that. And while we're waiting for that, let's go and go back here. So do I have valid? Yeah. So it's lab 14 in my Spring intensive. Okay. So as I mentioned, I was just tweeting about this. It's like, I don't remember all this stuff by heart. So I have to do it. So Spring intensive, lab, I forget what lab it is. I'll go to here and I'll figure out which lab it is. That was weird. So it's lab, what was I say, 14. Yeah, here it is, validate order. And so what I want is when we validate the form submission, what we do is we basically stick an @valid tag in front of the incoming form object. So what that will mean is in our deposit controller, we will do an @valid for the transaction command, right? So we'll do that. Whoops, we'll do this. And this will validate the transaction command, and if there are any problems, it'll create what are called binding errors that will be able to put into the form object. So sorry, the model that will go back and when the thing redisplays. Given the time I have allotted left, we're not going to finish this, but we'll get it started, and then tomorrow we'll finish it. But let's get at least started. So what we want to do is, and so as I mentioned, we'll be able to display errors. There's this th errors stuff that we can use. But what we want to do is we want to have a validation test first. So we will, and this is a nice unit test that we can use. I'm gonna steal this. It's not stealing; it's my own stuff. And what we want is, so this will be a unit test for, but it's in our web adapter. So let's be in our test stuff. That's our integration test stuff. Here's our test. So here, and we want to create a new class. And so this is transaction command validation test. So we'll create this local validator factory. This will set up, so there's the Hibernate validator that basically is what we use, and this thing implements basically the whole validation stuff that ends up getting used. Whoops. And what we can now do is we can say test and deposit. Actually, it's not specific to deposit, it's transaction command. So amount less than 0 should be not valid. And so what we can do is we can now basically create the transaction command, and then we'll get these constraint violations. So it looks something like this. And these aren't constraint violations against coffee order form. It is going to be against our transaction command. And let's move this over to new line. And we're going to validate an instance of a transaction command. So we'll create a local variable equals new transaction command. And then we'll set some stuff up. We'll basically set the date to, oh, I don't know. I don't think it'll match. We don't care right now. And for the description, we don't care. And for the amount, that's what we care about. And so we want, if they type in -1, then that should be invalid. So I'm just tuning up my automatic import because I never want to use, I only want to use the assert J, assert that. Okay, so I expect there to be 1 violation, right? Not that, so we expect, if everything is proper, we expect there to be 1 violation. Now, since we haven't done anything to the transaction command yet, we'll see we'll have to add an annotation. This might be annoying because this is a string. We might want to have this get converted to an int. I've been generally using string, this decimal to pennies. Actually, big decimal would be the most appropriate. We'll have to see what we can validate because it's going to be a little hard to validate against amount. Although, since we only basically we don't want any minuses, we could do that. But this might be a little hard to validate. Okay, so that might cause us to change something with our transaction command. But let's just run this test. This will fail because we will get 0 constraint violations. Why are you running? Oh, that was compiling. Oh, that was quite a bit of startup for the Hibernate validator. Okay. Right, so basically we expected it to be 1, but it was 0 because there were basically no constraint violations. So what we can do is we can go into our transaction command, and we're going to want, so this is going to be the Hibernate validation, and I will have to go look at what that is. Here we go. So we could insist that, so if we did it on big decimal, we can do some stuff there, but we're basically on a string. We could enforce it to, could use a regex. But I think we're going to have to bite the bullet and convert it to big decimal. So we'll have it come in as a big decimal, and then we can do some validation on it. Let's see, so what is that going to require? What is that going to change if we convert this to a big decimal? So can we do a type migration? So there's a refactoring called type migration. And we can basically say, change this field string to be a big decimal. And we want it everywhere. And so let's preview what'll happen. So that means this one will migrate. I don't think that's going to be sufficient. So yeah, I don't think that's going to be good enough. So I think we'll have to do it the hard way. We'll say this is a big decimal. We will now find a bunch of compile errors, because everywhere it's expecting a string, we're going to be using a big decimal. So what we're going to do is have another method that takes a big decimal and converts it and scales it by power 10. So recall that internally our count and our transactions are using whole numbers as integers. We're probably going to want to convert that to big decimal because we've been dealing with ints for a while. I've been avoiding big decimal mainly because big decimal is really annoying to deal with, but we've already got it, sort of the bulk of that code working, so I think it might be time to convert that. On the other hand, there is the money, so there's a JSR for money that's recently been revived for Java money stuff. So I'm going to hold off because I actually want to see if that's sort of ready for prime time. The last time I looked at it, it hadn't been updated in years because of personnel changes on the expert group. So let me make another note here. Let's transition from scaled int to either big decimal or Java money. Okay. But for now, what I'll do is if I refactor this method and extract this out, I will create a method that takes a big decimal. And so I basically want it to be the same method, which is going to be decimal to pennies. And then I can inline this. And so now I have a method that that takes a big decimal as a parameter. So now this, you're funny. So now this works as is. Actually, that might be it, because I think everywhere else I just use amount in cents, right? This amount was only used just in the tiny place of converting from the input that, and basically Spring does this conversion for us. That might work. So let me run all the unit tests. I was worried I have to change in a bunch of places, but I think this might be it. Yes, other than our tests. So I can say big decimal dot value of -1. And the spend controller test could do the same thing. Big decimal value, big decimal value of, and then 3479. And this other place I'm sure is the same thing. Okay, so let's run all the unit tests. And other than the one that we're actually writing, they all pass, so that's good. The magic of encapsulation. So I want to just, this is super important. It may seem minor, but this is really important. The fact that command had big decimal, had amount as a string versus a big decimal, because even though this is essentially a DTO, because I had this method amount in cents that returned an int, I protected and basically encapsulated the way this amount was stored. So there's a lot of code, like we can even look at it, right? There's a whole, maybe not a lot of code. There is some code in the controllers that basically uses that, but that code didn't have to change because it was properly encapsulated inside of this command, right? And this is, again, really important, and I see a lot of code when I review code for folks, because that's my job, that's what I do. They use strings everywhere or ints everywhere, and they don't properly protect and have sort of higher level types, but mainly they don't encapsulate things properly. They create objects with getters and setters, not realizing that you haven't protected anything if you're providing a getter and setter, because you've tied and coupled that get method and that set method to the exact type that you're storing internally. And so you'll notice I don't call this get amount in cents, it's amount in cents. And that's protecting the internal format. And this is just a DTO where even I relax the idea of sort of getters and setters. Much more important in your business domain objects. Okay, so now that we've converted, that was easier than I thought it would be. Now that we've converted the amount, I'm going to go and run the integration tests, because that's where we might get some failures because there we're working at the level of we're sending in text, and Spring needs to convert that. Previously it was converting that, not really converting it because it was just taking the amount as a string. Now it's converting that string amount to a big decimal automatically for us. That will hopefully just still work. I'll run those, and while those are running, we'll go ahead and put the validation on our amount. And so we can basically say we want this to be positive, not positive, positive. And that is a JavaX validation constraints annotation that we want. So just going back to the bean validations, we basically want this one. We're basically saying that the value of the field must be a positive number. We don't want positive or 0 because we don't want to allow 0. We want just a positive number. Okay. And that should be it. The integration tests are still running. That's fine. Let's go back now to our validation test. So now we're basically saying that our amount is -1. Our constraint said it must be positive, so we expect it to actually have a constraint violation for that one. So let's run this test. And yes, we can run tests simultaneously. And who will finish first? The integration tests. Looks like they finished about the same time. So valid, right? In fact, if we want to sort of see what the validation is, we could say has size 2 and run this. And we can see that there was only 1, and we can see this interpolated message must be greater than 0. So we'll see that we're going to want to customize the error message, because this is the default error message that gets created as part of the validation mechanism. Let's change this back to 1. And so we can now have, so that's our sort of negative test. Let's create another test where amount as 0 should be not valid. Should cause violations. Should be not valid. Okay, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll basically create, I don't even think I have to do this. This is the only thing that we care about. So we'll do this. This will be, we can actually just use the handy shortcut 0. These are our constraint violations, and then we can assert that our constraint violations has size of 1, because that's still a validation error. We can make sure this fails. That will really very likely fail. And then we can write one that will test the happy case, which is amount greater than 0 should be valid. And so this will be value of, I can actually use a shortcut. We can say something like 10 or 1. And basically we'll assert that the constraint violations is empty. And this one failed because we said we wanted 2, but we really only expect 1. We'll cause this one to fail. Again, I want tests to fail the first time I write them. There is no value in having a test that never failed. So I know it might seem weird for me to constantly cause tests to fail, even though the functionality is already there. Because we got a fair amount of functionality for free just by putting that in there. Okay, so those two failed. This one failed as expected. Expected actual not to be empty, but it was empty. So let's make it having to be empty. Run these all again. That should pass. And yes, all our integration tests passed. There was no problem there. These all pass. That's all good. And we are done. So what we'll have to do, though, is hook up the validation to the UI, because right now, if I run the application with the validation there, did I put the validation in the controller? In my deposit controller? Yeah. So right now my deposit does a valid, which basically I'm ignoring. So we'll see that we'll have to put some stuff in there to finish that. So where is my story? We are doing input validation. So we'll finish that next time. We will also next time, I'll have offline, I'll sort of clean up some of the UI button stuff. Another validation we want to implement is making sure the balance never goes below 0, because that would be bad. So let's just run the application. Who we logged in as? Parent. Okay. And so if we go to deposit and we say the amount is -10, haha, basically we get an exception. And we'll see, we'll handle this. This is what's called a bean, basically a binding error. And so basically it rejected -10, and we'll be able to do that. So that part of the validation works. So next time we'll get rid of this exception. Also, we'll clean up the forms, because I'll clean up the forms offline to get us a nicer place, but I won't put anything specific to this until tomorrow when I stream again. All right, so as usual, thank you for those who are attending. Again, you can visit my website at tedmyoung.com. All right, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Bye.